Hello, Stitchers. Welcome to Stitch Please, the official podcast of Black Women Stitch, the sewing group where Black Lives Matter. I'm your host, Lisa Woolfork. I'm a fourth-generation sewing enthusiast with more than 20 years of sewing experience. I am looking forward to today's conversation, so sit back, relax, and get ready to get your stitch together.
Hey friends, hey, it's Lisa from Black Women Stitch and the Stitch Please podcast. And as I say every episode, this is a very special episode because today we are talking about Innie or outie. That's right. Are you an Innie or an outie? And that is about notches. How do you cut your notches? Notches are essential elements of putting a sewing pattern together. They are the marks that you can find on a commercial pattern as indicated by triangles. You have one triangle to indicate the front, a double triangle to indicate the back. The triple indicates the center back seam. All of this information becomes important when you want to make sure that you're putting in your sleeve correctly. You do not want to do the thing that I did when I first started sewing and would sew the back of the sleeve to the front of the garment. That did not turn out well. So what the notches are helping you to understand is that you are meant to put the back of that sleeve to the back of the garment. And so this is one of the simple reasons why notches are really important. They help us match front to backs. They help with setting in sleeves. They also help to distribute the ease of a sleeve. That's why the front of the sleeve is shaped one way and the back of the sleeve is shaped another. It's designed to go into the arm's eye in a certain way, and the notches help you get there. They help you to achieve the desired result and to have the proper amount of ease and those kinds of things. So notches are pretty important. So important that folks have developed some rather strong feelings about notches. Now, I'm not going to go into my own personal approach until the end, but let's start with the outies, the people that cut their notches outward. The way this works, you are cutting along the cut line of your garment. You get to a notch, you make a 45-degree angle and take a snip, and then you make another 45-degree angle down in order to make that triangle shape, and then you continue onward. That is how you make an outward notch. I do something similar with a little rotary cutter. Very dangerous. Don't try this at home for entertainment purposes only. But yes, I do also cut my notches outward with a rotary cutter. Now, the outies really like this method. For many, it's what we learned first. Those who learned to sew in home economics classes, some learn from family members. The commercial patterns especially, that's what we understand as Simplicity, McCall's, Vogue, and Butterick. From the 1960s to the 1980s, those patterns literally printed the notches outward. And I think even now the notches are still printed outward. So those of us who learn this way, it became kind of embedded in our understanding of how notches work. I asked a few folks from the community, and people were weighing in on Instagram, and folks kind of shared like, oh, at the age of 11, my mother taught me to cut them outward, or I cut them outward because I want to preserve my patterns, or my home ec teacher insisted that we cut them outward. So this is how people who cut their notches outward kind of came into doing it. Here's some of the things that are, I think, beneficial about cutting outward. When you cut your notches outward, you can see them better. So there is a certain degree of visibility that happens when you cut your notches outward. You are also preserving the integrity of your seam allowance. When you cut your notches outward, you are saving the seam allowance. That's because rather than kind of dipping into it, you are you're letting it just live on its own. Now, here's an interesting fact about the notches. Each notch, if you were to measure the notch, I did this with a 2012 Vogue pattern, and I measured the notches by overlapping them. The measurement of the notch is 1/2 of the 5/8 inch seam allowance. This means that they're kind of including that, so we'll get to that when we talk about the ennies. But I just thought it was really interesting that when you look at the notch itself, it's designed to kind of help you think about the seam allowance as well. So someone else said that they liked to cut the notches outward because if you wanted to adjust your garment later, and that's another thing about the seam allowance. If you want it to be a little bit looser and you've cut your seam allowance inward, then you don't have much room to play. So this is what we get from those who cut outward. You cut your notches outward, you're saving your seam allowance, you can see it a little bit easier, and many people simply learned that method. Okay, so let's turn to the ennies. Now, the inward notching sometimes or often comes later. If you've taken pattern making courses, if you've done industrial sewings, or if you're in an efficiency environment where you want to save fabric, and that kind of conservation matters. I think that that's one of the reasons that cutting notches inward is part of a way to have better and more efficient production. And so there's folks who say that they like to cut their notches inward. You can place your pattern pieces more closely. Now, this is true. So if you have say you have some princess seams, for example, and you know those seams are going to curve and they're going to go together. If you've cut your notches outward, that triangle is poking out into the rest of the fabric, meaning that you can't get your pieces as close as you might. And we love to save us a 1/4 inch of fabric. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's a 1/4 inch. It's my 1/4 inch. I want to save my fabric. So I think that that's a really wonderful reminder that there is a benefit to cutting inward. Similarly, the notion of saving not just material, but also saving time. And some were saying that the way that industrial sewing works is that they care a lot about efficiency and about keeping the materials as cost effective as possible. And so what we learn from those who cut their notches inwards, that they care about the fabric efficiency, like saving the fabric, having clean cutting layouts where you don't have little like triangle flags like hanging off the end. And it's also good for consistency and speed. And it seems like, and again, just because this has been my own trajectory, I am wondering if it's the case, if you might learn to cut your notches outward, but then as you develop more skills, or if you go down an industrial sewing path, you learn to cut them inward. And for me, that's my story. I started cutting my notches outward. That's what the pattern looked like. That's what my grandmother did. That's what she taught me. So I thought that's what you did, especially when you're looking at some of the older patterns. And these notches are humongous. Like, I really feel like if you look at some of those like 1957 or 1963 simplicity sewing patterns, the notches are like the size of quarters. They're gigantic. And so I'm going to cut that outward because it's the shape that's on the pattern piece. And that's how I came to do cutting them outward. And so 25 years later, I'm cutting my notches outward, cutting them outward. And I see someone, I believe it was Stoney from the Sew Train. Stoney was using a pattern notcher. It looks like a hole punch, But instead of like poking a hole in paper, it's like a very narrow, almost like a U-shaped punch. And it just takes a little chunk, a little teeny tiny chunk out of your fabric. Listen, when I saw her do that and the length of that notch that it makes is maybe a 1/4 inch. It's not very big at all. I was convinced. It might be 3/8. It's not very big at all. It is not a very big. I think it is closer to a 1/4 inch. I'm trying to compare it now to like a quilt seam, but it is a very small mark. And that, it helped me to feel like, okay, I can now put my pattern pieces a little bit closer together. I can also be a bit more efficient in my cutting without having to maneuver the scissors or the snips or the rotary cutter or all of the other things that I was using when I was cutting my notches outward. Hey friends, hey, it's Lisa from Black Women Stitch and the Stitch Please podcast. And do you want to stay in the loop with everything Black Women Stitch? Sure you do. So our weekly newsletter is where it's at. You'll get podcast updates, community news, behind the scenes peeks, and ways to support the work we're doing. Whether you're a longtime listener or just getting to know us, this is the easiest way to stay connected. So click the link and sign up today. Promise we will not flood your inbox, just your creative spirit. Thanks so much. See you soon. Now, here's the thing that I also want to share. So again, just to go back, we've been talking about ennies versus outies, and outies are those who cut their pattern notches facing outward. And we've talked about how outward notchers want to preserve the seam allowance. They want it to be visible, and they want to be able to adjust their garments, which is one of the reasons why you keep the seam allowance. The ennies care about saving that fabric. It is a really great way to make sure you are using as much fabric as possible, as all of it, having the pattern pieces closer together, even though it's a small thing that's outward, that gets replicated over time. And it can sometimes make the difference between making sure all the pieces fit on the page and they don't. So it's not a small thing to save your fabric. It's also a sign for many of industrial sewing and learning. When people were transitioning from perhaps a home sewing environment where in home ec, they learned to cut the notches outward. But once they started working in costume shops or for different, industrial or designer applications, no one's cutting their notches outward. They are marking them inward, with sometimes not even with a notch, with a very teeny tiny snip. And then we have the folks who are neither. They do not cut their notches at all. These are non-notching notchers, okay? They do not notch. And this was really interesting because I think it's a great example of how the answer is not ennie or outie. It's, for some people, it's neither. Now, the folks who say that those who refuse the binary altogether, that's where the truth of it is, that you can do this without having ennie or outie. That there's a total third path that is not at all bound by the scissor. Okay, so here we go. Instead of cutting them inward or outward, they use other things to make these marks. Now, some folks, there was someone who said that they learned in a costume shop not to notch anything. Instead, they marked them. Some folks say, no, I don't cut my notches. I use a washable pen. I love a washable pen because washable pens will stand up during the process of sewing and pressing and cutting and all the different manipulations that are required of your fabric before it becomes a garment or whatever the final form is going to be. Though I absolutely love my heat soluble markers. That's my number one, I think, favorite type of marking supply. I do notice that when I am sewing or, working on a project, if I put it on the iron to press the seams open or flat or to press a dart, if that iron is too hot and is too close to the marks that I've made, those marks will fade, if not totally disappear. So I have to be really mindful as I am pressing as I go. This is not the case with a washable marker. And so being able to put that mark from a washable marker where a notch should be feels like a really good solution. Someone else said that with the small slits, so it's not even a notch, it's just a little tiny snippet, almost like the pattern notcher that I described earlier, but even smaller than that. It could be almost, you might not even see it at all. It could be totally undetectable. To me, it would be totally undetectable because I would never see that again. I would cut that little tiny slit and child, where did it go? Long gone. I would not probably find it again. But that is something that people are doing though, and it's working great for them. So we celebrate that. So the thing I like about the folks who don't cut their notches is that they have found a way that works well for them and allows them to both protect the seam allowance and to save fabric. So they're not cutting outward, which I think saves the seam allowance, and they're not cutting inward, which helps to, save the fabric overall. They're doing both, the best of both worlds. As we get ready to wrap up, I want to tell you about what I've kind of come to in terms of my own approach. I did talk about how a pattern notcher has become like a big lifesaver for me. I use it a lot. However, I don't use it on everything. There are some cases where primarily I am an Innie. I am a newly converted Innie. I now use my pattern notcher to cut my notches. Now, I keep saying a pattern notcher because it's really designed for designers who are creating pattern pieces or, sewing garments, right? Like here's your front, your back, or whatever. They use that notcher to help them put the pieces together. So, but it's not pieces of fabric, it's pieces of pattern paper. So it's part of the pattern design process. It's not meant to be used for fabric, though I don't know why not. Like, what? Why not? Anywho, I've been using it and it's been fine. But the point I was making was that there are excellent reasons to do all of these methods. The answer to the question, which notch method reigns supreme? Which is the best notch style? Is it Innie? Is it Outie? The answer is yes. Or is it Innie? Is it Outie? Is it neither? Or is it both? Yes, that's the answer. Yes, that's the answer. Whatever works best for you is the one that works best. Now, what I like to do is a bit of both. I do cut my notches inward. As I said, I learned how to do that from someone who had showed it on social media. And I said, oh, I'm going to get one of those. That's so great. So I got one and I have loved it ever since. However, it doesn't work well on everything. So I'm happy to use it for when I'm working with cotton wovens, when I'm working with linen, when I'm working with denim, a nice tight woven fabric, cutting notches inward using the pattern notcher. Excellent. Perfect. Cannot be beat. It's unobtrusive. It helps to, it does preserve the pattern piece. It lets me put pattern pieces closer together, so saves fabric. All of that's wonderful. But when I am working with a cotton lycra, when I'm working with a fabric that's a bit more slippery, especially knits, I find that I lose my any notches. I can't find them. I do the double for the back and the triple for the center back and the sing. And I know they're there because I snipped them, but I can't find them. And I think it's because of the nature of that fabric. It is cotton interlock and how cotton interlock works. So I have found for myself that cutting notches outward works wonderfully for knit fabrics, especially the knit fabrics that I like to sew. So just as we said before, the answer is yes, Outie is the best. Yes, Innie is the best. Yes, neither is the best. Yes, both are the best. See, a win-win-win. Now I need you to tell me, what is your notch style? How do you notch your pattern pieces? When you're cutting out your pattern, how do you do it? What works well for you? I am so curious. Let me know. You can hit me up at a voicemail message. It's on SpeakPipe. If you go to the Black Woman Stitch website, there's also a link in a chat to the SpeakPipe. So leave us a voicemail and let us know how you notch. Or you can message me at blackwomanstitch@gmail.com. Thanks so much, everyone, for stopping by today to talk about notches. And remember, all of the answers are correct. What works best for you is what works best. Thank you.
You've been listening to Stitch Please, the official podcast of Black Women Stitch, the sewing group where Black Lives Matter. We appreciate you joining us this week and every week for stories that center Black women, girls, and femmes in sewing. We invite you to join the Black Women Stitch Patreon community with giving levels beginning at $5 a month. Your contributions help us bring the Stitch Please podcast to you every week. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your support. And come back next week and we'll help you get your stitch together.